Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. Today, December 2nd, 2022 is a very special day for this channel because today is the 5-year anniversary of the channel, The Real Super Sam. And for this, I'm going to be talking about Spider-Man the Animated Series, listing off what my top 10 episodes of the show are. Premiering November 19th, 1994, the show has an older Peter Parker, one who's in college and has been Spider-Man for a few years now, though he has never met any of his rogues yet since they haven't been created. So I grew up with this show on the internet and DVD. It was the first complete series I ever bought. While airing, the show was such a hit since its February 1995 debut that the power brokers at Fox Network were seriously considering upping the order from the original 65 episodes to 100, if it went on. We for sure would have gone to see the Puma, since they had planned on using Puma all along. They just ran out of episodes to produce. The show, like Batman the Animated Series, did create some new characters. Detective Terry Lee, first appearing in the Mysterio Season 1 episode, and Dr. Mariah Crawford, first appearing in the Kraven Season 1 episode, Agent X, the red-haired S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, I think Nick Fury's second in command, Anastasia Hardy, Felicia Hardy's mom, was original in this show. So is Silvermane's daughter, and so is the show's version of Kingpin's father, but they were never used again outside of the series. I think the best one that was made was Mariah Crawford. Of course, everyone knows that the censorship filtered what they could do or show, like have no realistic guns, no broken glass, even though we saw a broken glass window in episode 26, etc. Even though Kingpin at the time was more of a Daredevil villain, he was in almost half the episodes of the show, specifically 34 out of the 65 episodes, so yeah, more than half. And I think he was done great here, especially in seasons 3 and 4, but I'm glad they were able to use him instead of a stand-in like in the Spectacular Spider-Man having Tombstone, though Spider-Man was younger in that series. The show also had no Sandman because of a live-action James Cameron-made movie that was being worked on. That was also the reason Electro was introduced so much later and was so different from the comics. The show had Hydro Man instead of Sandman. Thankfully, they still had a shape-morphing villain. If it wasn't for Taz, I don't think Hydro Man would have become popular at all. Though in the show, he was a lot more messed up, being an obsessed stalker of Mary Jane, and then being brought into the Clone Saga tease in Season 5. Another fun fact, originally in the Secret Wars saga, it was supposed to feature a chapter in which Spider-Man teamed up with the X-Men to defeat Mr. Sinister. Though the episode was written, budgetary restrictions meant it had to be cut. Storm still featured in the Secret Wars due to the fact that the actress who voiced the character was based in California at the time. Anyway, another fact is that the creative team decided not to use Gwen Stacy in the series because they did not want to use a character that had been dead in the comics for over 20 years, and longtime fans would expect her to eventually die on the show. Because of this decision, many of the stories were changed to the events happening to Felicia Hardy or Mary Jane Watson. However, Gwen Stacy did appear in the last episode of the series. So let's get on to the list, and when I give out the number of what the episode is, it's from the DVD, not aired or created date. And number 10 is episode 46, Partners. A weird episode to be one of my favorites, but growing up I always found this episode entertaining, funny as it's like a sequel episode to season 2's finale. The plot here is Alistair Smythe is currently working as Silvermane's top scientist. He kidnaps the Black Cat, then bribes Spider-Man into capturing either the Scorpion or the Vulture, because they both have unique DNA samples, which are essential for Silvermane to restore his adulthood. In exchange, he'll release the Black Cat. This episode has a whole lot of characters, and it's a sort of a wrap-up for the Silvermane in the show as well. It's also the episode to make Spider-Man and Black Cat official, well, like the episode title, Partners. There is like 3 really odd but funny moments from the series, just in this one episode, like Silvermane as a baby talking about pooping himself. It was also interesting to see the Scorpion have a romance with a random lady, and strive to do good. The only thing I really don't like here is how Alistair Smythe is fighting Spider-Man again after the two left off on a happy note his last appearance. I get he's going anywhere to save his father, but still, just breaking to Oscorp or somewhere, he's gonna end up at Oscorp anyway. Without that, it's an amazing episode, especially since from what I can tell, it was a completely original story, and I love the explanation of how Vulture can stay young forever now. Also, re-establishing the status quo of Silvermane being old. The biggest plot here is that the Vulture is cured of the man-spider disease that he had in season 2 finale, and that's never explained, so I guess it's the biggest plot hole. A little fun fact, Frank Gorshin, the first live-action Riddler actor, auditioned for the part of the Scorpion for the show. He also tried to be the voice of the Hobgoblin. The voice acting for the Scorpion was going to be given to the actor named Landau, but then he won an Oscar after recording one episode, so he was unavailable, and then we finally got Richard Mole to voice the Scorpion. Okay, and my number 9 pick is episode 6, Dr. Octopus Armed and Dangerous. For this list context, I view Dr. Octopus as Spider-Man's greatest enemy. He's what if Peter Parker, with his scientific knowledge, turned against the world for the bullying and loss of his parents. He's Peter Parker without Uncle Ben and Aunt May. The plot is, when Peter arrives for a date with Felicia Hardy, she is kidnapped by the corrupt scientist Dr. Octopus in order to force her mother, Anastasia Hardy, to provide him with ransom money, in which she promised to fund his experiments earlier in his life. Complicating things, Peter recognizes the madman as Otto Octavius, his favorite science mentor from his childhood days. I love this episode for the interactions between J. Jonah Jameson and Otto Octavius, the relationship blossoming between Peter Parker and Felicia Hardy, the jokes, so many jokes that still work now, the way Ock's tentacles look and are attached to him, they're bonded to his back, and he still has them on him in prison. The voice actor for Dr. Octopus, Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., is still my favorite voice for the villain. If you didn't know, the background scene during a Spider-Sense moment, which happens in this episode, are a nod to the backgrounds used during the Ralph Bakshi era of the 1960s Spider-Man 1967 cartoon. This isn't a fitting, important story appearance of Dr. Octopus, and this being a time where an older Spider-Man first meets Otto, it was done really well. I love the connection Peter has with Ock over the knowledge of science, which is why way before either of them had superpowers. And me personally, I always like Peter and Felicia more than Peter and Mary Jane here, and this being a step towards a relationship with Felicia Hardy makes it a bit more fun of an episode for me. Number 8 is episode 39, titled The Spot. Starring The Spot in just this one episode, this felt like a very different type of Spider-Man TAS episode, as a good chunk of it follows Jonathan Owen. Also, The Spot beforehand only appeared in one story ever in Spectacular Spider-Man issues 99 to 100. Thanks to this episode, The Spot never became forgotten, just underrated. The show had these time dilation portals that were like teleportation devices, and I kind of think The Spot was just used to get these into the hands of the Green Goblin for episode 41's events, but still, this episode was written by one person, and it is so much fun. Spot used to work for Stark Tech, but the project was cancelled, so Wilson Fisk snatches him up to work on the project for him, for Kingpin's purposes to rule the world. One night, Spot's machine breaks and it gives him superpowers, so he decides to rob a bank for money to be able to leave the employee of Wilson Fisk, who he then discovers is the kingpin of crime. He tries to fight Fisk, but he has his crush hostage and forces Owen to bring him Spider-Man. Spider-Man and Spot work together to trick Fisk, but then there's a huge portal in the sky that was left open, and now it's sucking everything into it, which is why they all have to team up together and stop this threat, ending with the apparent death of the Spot. It will always be interesting to think that that they used the Spot in the show out of all the forgotten Spider-Man villains at the time, like the Fly, Tarantula, Stegra, and Cyclone. They had Spot. I could easily see Cyclone here replacing the Spot. Like I said, probably just to use his portals, they chose the Spot. This episode feels very unique to the rest of the show, but at least we got a rematch between Spider-Man and the Kingpin here, especially after the events of episode 33 and 34 with Daredevil. Spider-Man almost had Kingpin, I think, here, but then they had to save New York. There was a lot of funny lines in this episode alone. I know this episode is divisive. There's not a lot of people who are in the middle of liking or hating it. There was a lot of iconic moments in the episode as well, and the Spot was a very different character compared to other rogues in the show, if you can even call Spot a rogue here. The last shot with the Hobgoblin tease was also very nice. Oh yeah, this episode also revealed that Felicia Hardy still has feelings for Spider-Man, even though she's with her boyfriend Jason. One fun fact is Malcolm McDowell originally was meant to voice the Spot in the series. He was the voice of Metallo in Superman TAS. If you're just watching this series as just a series to watch, I think this episode is definitely worth a rewatch, especially for the rematch between Spider-Man and the Kingpin, even though it lasts for only like 2 minutes. And my number 7 pick is episode 35 of the show, called The Ultimate Spider Slayer. Angry over his son's arrest and conviction, as well as Spider-Man now knowing his secret identity, to which he blames Alistair Smythe, Kingpin attempts to kill Spider-Man by turning Alistair Smythe into a cyborg. In Season 3, many episodes had Madam Web give Spider-Man lessons to become a better hero, to see if he should lead for some kind of future test. Thanks to Madam Web's cryptic riddle on why Alistair is working for Kingpin, Spider-Man finds that Alistair's father, Spencer, survived the explosion where Kingpin had put him in cryogenic suspension to manipulate Alistair. Alistair Smythe, creator of the Spider Slayers and right-hand man to Kingpin, being in every episode he's been in so far, same episodes as the Kingpins appeared in. This episode actually reintroduces the character of Herbert Landon, being Alistair Smythe's replacement. And Herbert Landon was the villain of the X-Men Spider-Man crossover two-parter in Season 2. He turned into a giant monster and then kind of got cured. He kind of looks like Two-Face. Anyway, this episode marks one of the only times a character punches someone, and it happens when Alistair Smythe punches Kingpin in the stomach after learning his father is still alive. And Season 3 had a theme of sins committed by fathers. In this episode, Spencer Smythe failed to kill Spider-Man, so his son Alistair began working for Kingpin to avenge his death. However, it's revealed that Spencer was alive and Kingpin was just manipulating Alistair again. Honestly, that was one of the biggest plot twists in the show for me. I love the callback to Kingpin and Norman Osborn being friendly again after the episodes in Season 1 with the original Spider Slayers and the Hobgoblin. I like this origin of Alistair Smythe being a Spider Slayer a lot more than the comics, much more than the original story. He's very sympathetic here, and even beforehand in the series he was. I'll say it here, this show was the first time Adam Webb actually appeared outside the comics. Also, the show was the first time Harry Osborn appeared in animation. This can be seen as the middle point of the series, making this episode a turning point in the Kingpin Smythe and even Spider-Man vs. Kingpin relationship. It worked really well. It was exciting to see where the future goes, not only with the heroes, but also with Mary Jane, and if she'll choose Peter Parker to be her love interest. My sixth pick is episodes 14 and 15, The Insidious 6, Battle of the Insidious 6, the Season 2 premiere. And yes, they're called Insidious 6 here, not Sinister 6. The plot starts simple enough. The Kingpin has planned a jailbreak to get the Chameleon, Dr. Octopus, Rhino, Shocker, Scorpion, and Mysterio out of prison to destroy Spider-Man. Spider-Man, though, has lost his powers and has to run away from the villains' team-up until Doc Ock kidnaps May Parker to get Spider-Man to save her, since Peter Parker takes photos of Spider-Man for the Bugle. Scorpion actually comes up with this plan, and that's reference to Episode 2, where Jameson hires Matt Gargan to spy on Peter to see how he gets Spidey pictures. There is also a rivalry between Scorpion and Dr. Octopus here, and Scorpion somehow knows and admires the Kingpin, quickly agreeing to work for him. Also, Wilson Fisk, Kingpin in the episode, just reveals himself to all these supervillains, then he lets them go at the end of the episode freely, like, yeah, none of them will reveal his secret for money or power. Hey, wait a minute, Scorpion is genetically modified in this series, like in the comics, so why isn't he in secure lockup like Rhino and Dr. Octopus? Anyway, just these silly things in the episode, which makes it really silly, but fun episode for the show. First off, there are so many supervillains in here. It's the only appearance of the Owl in the 90s TAS cartoon verse. Maybe in a future story they could have done an adaptation of the Owl-Octopus War. He was in the Spider-Man TAS video game though. First time we get Silverman in the rivalry with the Kingpin, and in episode 15, Silverman tries to attack the Kingpin of crime, but Fisk is one step ahead and almost kills him. Silverman needing to help, rely on Spider-Man's help to get away from the Kingpin. Spider-Man losing his powers here is not a mental block from Amazing Spider-Man Annual 1, it's actually the start of the season-long plot of him still mutating from the spider bite. Again, something I like more than the original comic story is how he loses his powers and what that ties into the plot. And I also appreciate how they adapted ASM issue 12 here with Dr. Octopus unmasking Spider-Man, and in the show, it's in front of the whole Insidious 6. Now, Spider-Man has no power, so everyone just thinks Peter was just pretending here. Another plus for this episode, or episodes, is the memorable animations like the witchy Aunt May Chameleon turns into, and the close-up shot of Rhino's eyes when he's chasing Peter Parker. Shocker could have straight out murdered Peter Parker in this episode if he didn't get his powers back at that instant, and I love the little side mission the Kingpin is on to kidnap Silvermane. I think that was his goal. I know for sure it was to see Spider-Man defeated once and for all, but he was hanging Silvermane out of a helicopter. And then Spider-Man puts him down a chimney, and Silvermane tells kids that he's Santa Claus afterwards. Oh yeah, and Shocker being in prison with his suit on. Actually, we never see Shocker's face in this whole show. Even in this episode, in episode 15, where his suit blows up and he jumps out for 3 frames, he still has his mask on. There really was no leader of the Six in this show. Yeah, Dr. Octopus had the most to do, but he wasn't their boss, and even though he wanted to be. And if they gave Mysterio a lot more to do, kind of like the story in Another Return of the Sinister Six, this could have been a full 3-parter. Oh, and I guess they could have replaced a villain in the team, like Shocker, and introduced a new one like Beetle or Boomerang for a very short while. Maybe then tease the Sinister Syndicate afterwards appearing. With all the characters and interactions and callbacks and whatnots, wow, definitely one of the most well-known Spider-Man episodes ever. Yep, here we go into the top 5, and my 5th pick is episode 53, The Wedding, the season 5 premiere, where Peter and Mary Jane get married. Hearing this, Harry Osborn becomes the second Green Goblin, the new Goblin, again, to crash it. I wish we got more of Liz Allen in this series. She barely appeared, but was always there working at the coffee place, which was not called the Coffee Bean for some reason. Anyway, she was also in the origin retelling episode. With her, we could have gotten Molten Man. Anyway, her and Harry maybe getting together like in the comics would have opened up a writing way that I think this show could have done better than in the comics. And the plot really is just that simple. Peter and Mary Jane get married and Harry Osborn becomes the Green Goblin again to crash it. The thing that makes this great is all the characters appearing and the kind of silly antics that happen. I will say that I agree that maybe this could have been the season 4 finale instead of the season 5 premiere. It maybe would have worked a lot better. Or just looking back on it would have been a better telling for a series. But anyway, there is a crazy moment here where Harry Osborn, Green Goblin, shows up in the middle of the ceremony, grabs Mary Jane, and threatens to blow up the church if the priest doesn't marry him and Mary Jane. Like that would work. So some great moments here is Wilson Fisk and Jameson getting involved in a contest to give Peter and Mary Jane the best wedding ever. Fisk still paying Peter back for saving his life back in episode 11 when Peter pushed him out of the way from a hobgoblin assassination. Felicia Hardy is there and becomes the Black Cat when Harry attacks. While fighting, she flirts with Spider-Man, and yeah, she never finds out in the series that Spider-Man is Peter Parker. Also, I think the reason the Ultimate Slayer works with Osborn again or Oscorp, well, I think that makes a lot of sense, a lot more than him working for Silvermane. And it's cool to see Kingpin stand against Alistair Smythe again in this way, using a Spider Slayer to foil Alistair's new employer's plan. Also, I love how Kingpin just swings Scorpion around in the fight and rips off his tail. The episode really kicks off with a bang with another fight between Spider-Man and the Scorpion. The villain used in the comic Peter and Mary Jane got married in, which was Amazing Spider-Man Annual 21, was Electro, with a funny moment of Aunt May sort of roasting the Scorpion here. Okay, this is another episode that, of course, I really like. There's a wrap-up of a bunch of stuff from the previous episodes, Harry Osborn Goblin, Mary Jane, and Peter being in love. It's a very special episode. This plot has never happened in media before, Peter and MJ actually getting married, except for Spider-Man 3, the movie, sort of, I guess. Tying this up in the Harry Osborn Goblin stuff reminds me a bit of Spectacular Spider-Man issue 200, of how Harry tells MJ he'll never hurt her, even if he kills Peter Parker in their rivalry. And this was the most of Liz Allen we got in the show, really maybe the only important stuff. In all honesty, realistically, I can't figure out why I love this episode so much. I guess it's because of the uniqueness of the characters in the story, and the rareness of a story moment like this ever happening in superhero cartoon shows. Number 4 is episode 31, Enter the Green Goblin. The Hobgoblin appeared in the show before the Green Goblin, and while watching this detective-themed episode, with Spider-Man trying to find out why the Green Goblin is attacking Oscorp board members, this may not even be the Norman Osborn Green Goblin one either. Of course, it's revealed that it is, but the way this episode is set up and plays out, it's very different than most other episodes. I love how they actually do a callback to the Hobgoblin, how Spider-Man at first thinks that's the Hobgoblin running around. Long story short, a new figure in the episode is going around Manhattan and kidnapping everyone on the Oscorp board of directors, like Anastasia Hardy, J. Jonah Jameson, and even Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin. Kingpin, who is secretly still working with Osborn to make weapons for him, and now his assistant, Mandrell Strom, does. Kingpin is pretty fun in this episode, and almost reveals himself when he launches rockets that blow up the tunnel behind them while they're escaping Green Goblin's lair, and it seemingly is trapping Green Goblin and Spider-Man. Jameson, of all people, calls Fisk out on that move. Mandrell Strom is in the episode, working with Osborn while the Green Goblin is created, like in the live-action movie. Strom in the comics has a lot more going on with him. He's the guy I need to make a forgotten Spider-Man Rogue video on. It's revealed by unmasking that the Green Goblin is Norman Osborn, and he did this for revenge, calling out the crimes of the board members with a callback to Otto Octavius' origin story from episode 6. Diane has him snap out of his Goblin alternate personality, and he goes back to normal, like in the early comics. Actually, John Semper Jr. tried to have Norman Osborn be the true identity of the Hobgoblin originally. However, Stanley did not like that idea and was able to prevent it from happening. This is another episode where the word kill is used, and I can see a lot of similarities to the very first Spider-Man movie here with Norman Osborn Goblin, and it's great. Again, I really enjoyed the detective elements of finding out who the Green Goblin really is. Here we are in the top 3. My third favorite episode of Spider-Man TAS is episode 41, Turning Point, the season 3 finale. Now, I first saw this episode before I read the Spectacular Spider-Man magazine issue 2. I say that because this episode is exactly like that comic almost, except that just the endings are different, and I think the episode is done better. This episode takes an inspiration from basically 3 of the Green Goblin's greatest stories, or to me, 3 out of his top 4 stories. One of them is Amazing Spider-Man issue 39, where Green Goblin spies on Spider-Man and finds out his secret identity. And another one is the death of Green Goblin / Gwen Stacy in Amazing Spider-Man issues 121 and 122. Of course, here it's Mary Jane who dies, and Goblin doesn't, dull Spidey's spider sense with a new gas bomb, but he uses the time dilation accelerator to disappear and reappear quickly, making Peter think his spider sense was glitching out. And of course, the other story was Spectacular Spider-Man magazine issue 2, which is where the dinner party stuff is inspired by. Like, Norman and Osborn invites Peter Parker to a dinner party, and he threatens / tortures him with his secret, all leading to the end of the episode, the end of the season, where Mary Jane disappears, falling into a portal. Basically, it's treated as her dying. Then the Green Goblin gets hit with his own glider, and disappearing into another portal also. And then, for a wrap-up of the season, Spider-Man is yelling at Madam Web for not outright helping him, and I guess partly blaming her for what happened, for the death of Mary Jane, sending Madam Web off the show for now. And there's no wrap-up to the events until the beginning of the next episode, episode 42, Guilty, the season 4 premiere. This episode marks one of only 3 times in the entire series that Spider-Man throws a punch. Spider-Man punches Green Goblin while on his glider after Mary Jane accidentally fell into the time dilation portal. This episode features the last appearance of the real Mary Jane Watson. All future appearances of the character would either be her clone or Mary Jane from an alternate reality. And this is the last episode in which Linda Gary provided the voice of Aunt May as she would pass away. Not only one of the best Spider-Man TAS episodes, but the best Green Goblin cartoon episode ever. I wish someday Dr. Octopus gets his own episode like this one. Watching this episode, it's no wonder Green Goblin is labeled as Spider-Man's greatest enemy to like 99% of people. This is definitely an episode made by fans for the fans. My episode 2, number 2 pick, is episode 64 and 65, titled I Really Really Hate Clones and Farewell Spider-Man, premiering January 31st, 1998. This is the series finale and the very first time any sort of Spider-Verse event happened, and the successor to this was my favorite Spider-Man video game, Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, which had the voice actor Spider-Man for the show, C.D. Barnes, voiced the newest, recently introduced Spider-Man in that game, Spider-Man Noir. Anyway, the story picks up right after Secret Wars, an event that proved Spider-Man TAS as the best leader Spider-Man out of all of them. Now, Spider-Man must team up with the alternate versions of himself, one who's like Tony Stark with the spider armor from Web of Spider-Man issue 100, a 6-armed Spider-Man, a Peter Parker with Otto Octavius' arms, and Ben Reilly, the Scarlet Spider clone, and the voice actor for Spider-Man in a Spider-Man costume, or maybe the person who plays Spider-Man in live action wearing the costume at the time, I guess, which would be Leonardo DiCaprio. Anyway, that's a little bit confusing. Who is really under that mask? I think it's the voice actor. Anyway, there's like a normal person who's dressed up as Spider-Man from our world. Anyway, there's a threat that could destroy the multiverse if the Spider-Men don't stop him. And that threat comes from the Scarlet Spider TAS's universe, a clone Peter Parker who found out he was a clone and snapped, and then the Carnage symbiote, the symbiote of chaos and destruction, came out of a time dilation portal and it bonded to this Spider-Man, creating Spider Carnage. I always thought that red symbiote was the same one from the Carnage episode because of the ending of that episode where Carnage and Venom get sucked into another portal, but I guess that wouldn't be it, seeing that Season 6 premiere plans had the return of Carnage in them. My favorite part of these episodes is the lessons that Madam Web taught Spider-Man throughout this Season 3 pay off here, as him passing and growing through all the tests make him the leader of this group of Spider people, specifically realizing himself well enough and taking in Madam Web's lessons, like this saying, it's not how you defeat your enemies, it's the why. So he grabs Uncle Ben and he can convince the Spider Carnage to fight the symbiote's influence. He can't, so he commits suicide. It shows Spider-Man overcoming the worst of himself with the best of himself. And I waited until now to say that the voice of Madam Web is done by the legendary writer Stan Lee's wife, John Lee. The last episode, episode 65, is the only appearance of Gwen Stacy and Stan Lee in the show. This finale felt like a proper conclusion. It's a little weird to think that season 6 would have made this just another season finale. This series finale has the return of Man-Spider from episode 21, Hobgoblin and Green Goblin teaming up, the Kingpin's defeat, Fisk being the main antagonist of the show, so it's a big deal then, a version of Alistair Smythe as the ultimate Spider Slayer who is still working for the Kingpin, and Uncle Ben appearing. Madam Web's story wrapping up, and meeting Stan Lee. Overall, one of the best series finales for a cartoon, for a superhero cartoon also. And my number one pick, my favorite story in Spider-Man the Animated Series, is gonna be episodes 7, 8, and 9, the Alien Costume Saga. This show was the first time the symbiote was shown to change Peter Parker's attitude with the symbiote, and this story was originally going to be just a two-parter, but fans really wanted to see the alien costume, so they decided to make it 3. The plot opens up with astronaut John Jameson's shuttle crashing down in Manhattan, causing a panic. The shuttle lands on the George Washington Bridge. In the shuttle, there is a rare element called Promethium X, more powerful than plutonium. Spider-Man, trying to help John, meets a new villain, the Rhino. There, he's stealing the Promethium X rock, and he gets away in the scuffle. And during that, Spider-Man gets the symbiote on him, and he wakes up hanging upside down wearing it, just like in the movie Spider-Man 3, which came out later. Quickly learning that it can change the design, it gives him enhanced strength, making its own webs, I think. It doesn't specifically state that the costume makes its own webs, but anyway, he keeps the costume and starts acting like he's better than anyone, even to a point of almost killing the Rhino. The last scene shows us Venom is an illusion, which is pretty exciting since he's the last villain seen in the show's intro, and there is also a reference to Aerosmith's lead guitarist Joe Perry, who Joe Perry made the show's theme song. And episode 7 is the first time Spider-Man is actually referred to as Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. Later, in episode 8, the Shocker, who we never see under his mask, gets hired by Alistair Smythe, using one of Smythe's shock gauntlets to get the pictures Eddie Brock took at the bridge that night of the crash, because they could expose the Rhino and him having Promethium X. This all leads to Spider-Man fighting the Shocker at the clock tower and almost killing the foe. Realizing his attitude's changed because of the costume, he fights to get it off, using the clock tower's bell's loud sound as kryptonite basically against it, and he gets free. But the symbiote then attaches itself to Eddie Brock, who's there, and the two bond to kill Spider-Man and Peter Parker, becoming Venom, who we don't see in full until episode 9, the saga's finale. By the way, this is one of the only episodes to actually use the word death in it. Episode 9 starts off in a way I love, having the Rhino and Shocker team up to squash Spider-Man after the last 2 episodes, which is great because even today I think those 2 rogues are a little underrated. They almost defeat Spider-Man until Venom sees this and webs the 2 foes up in his own way, showing off how much stronger Venom is compared to Spider-Man. Now, he gets rid of the symbiote by hitting Venom with a sound to get the alien off of Eddie Brock and attaching the symbiote to a rocket as it blasts off. Kind of a weird, but very exciting way to get rid of the symbiote in this universe, at least for the first time. This was one out of only 2 3-part stories the show had, this and Secret Wars, this being the most iconic and one of the darkest stories from the show. Of course, Venom was a big deal in the 90s, and I read that the writers rewrote this script together, and I'd say they turned out a historically great Spidey story, the story used a lot in the comics, from the comics, like in issue 258 with the giant red suit Spider-Man versus the giant black suit Spider-Man. The ending of episode 8 with the symbiote coming off is just like what happened in Web of Spider-Man issue 1. And episode 9, with the scene right out of issue 317 with Eddie Brock visiting Aunt May at her house to threaten Spider-Man. The way the symbiote comes to Earth is from a shuttle and not during Secret Wars like the comics, which seems to be the main way it's done now. Of course, it stings that Venom only returned one more time in the show, but still, it was interesting to see Eddie Brock be built up into hating Spider-Man in the previous episodes. I think it was done a lot better than Harvey Dent, since Harvey Dent in Batman TAS only appeared in 2 episodes before he became Two-Face. Here, Eddie Brock was in like 4 or 5 before he became Venom, or even before this saga started. Eddie Brock basically wants what Peter Parker has, but with none of the responsibility, and in the Alien Costume Saga, it changed Peter's personality, turning Peter into someone like Brock until he fights his temptation and stops. It is a really great contrast between the 2 characters. I feel like they also tried to do this in Spider-Man 3. Long story short, this shows Venom is what Peter would have become if he kept the symbiote, and Venom acts like he did in the early comics, making jokes and having a fun time being Venom, Spider-Man's poison. I think people would be surprised at how silly Venom acted in the early days, almost as much as he does in the live-action movies. Here, they captured it really well as a censored show could at least. The Alien Costume Saga is definitely my favorite episode of this series. Yeah, maybe the saga happened a little early in the show, but the creative team definitely did everything they could. I especially appreciate the added pressure of Spider-Man in the first two parts, where Jameson puts $1 million bounty on his head, and the lighting of some blue appearing on his suit is a golden touch. I think it would have been cool for the suit to return in this series, but anyway, a perfect Spider-Man TAS storyline for everybody. Ranking the seasons, I definitely say Season 3 is my favorite by far. Then Season 1, Season 4, Season 5, and then Season 2 definitely being my least favorite by far. Some honorable mentions for this list episodes is Episodes 11 and 12, The Hobgoblin Parts 1 and 2 from Season 1. The Daredevil team up in episodes 33 and 34, and episode 45, The Return of Kraven the Hunter with Calypso. I'll add this in here because I think it's kind of important. The show did the best job of any piece of Spider-Man media to Robbie Robertson. I think it stinks that he hasn't really been in Spider-Man stuff for the last decade or so. In here, they explained his relationship with Tombstone, his family. He was even connected to one of the 6 Forgotten Warriors. He was also in on the action sometimes. They did a great job with this side character. So some of the worst episodes of the show to me, one of them is episode 62, The Gauntlet of the Red Skull. Another one is episode 48, The Vampire Queen. Episode 56, the very middle of the 5-episode arc, The 6 Forgotten Warriors, with the only Spider-Man actually being in that episode was with the Shocker and Scorpion attacking Aunt May's house to get some keys. I know a lot of people don't like the Rocket Racer episode 32, but I think it was a nice change of pace in the season. I dislike episode 28 with Doctor Strange a lot more than Rocket Racer's episode. The thing I would have wanted to see in Season 6 would have been the Rose's story arc, since Richard Fisk's story had been going on since Season 3. It would have been very interesting to see him, beat a Rose, since he was never against his father's criminal escapades, and he even worked along with him. He was also never the schemer for his story either. Also, if they had a return of Peter Parker's parents, with the Chameleon being the villain for a 2-part episode story, just like the comics, it would fit perfectly. It'd be really exciting to see. I've listed my thoughts in top 10 episodes of X-Men Evolution and Spider-Man TAS now, and surprisingly to me, I think X-Men Evolution is the better show, though I like Spider-Man TAS a lot more, of course. There just wasn't as much continuity in Spider-Man TAS compared to X-Men Evolution, though there were more shocking moments watching Spider-Man than I thought, like Spider-Man diving in after Mary Jane disappearing and swimming around for a minute screaming looking for her, or when the symbiote suit knocked Shocker off the bell tower ledge, even when Octopus unmasked Spider-Man in front of this Insidious 6. Well, that was my list on the top 10 Spider-Man the Animated Series episodes, and thank you so much for watching. Here's the 5 more years of this channel, The Real Super Sam, and with that said, see you later, have a good day.